She went into her bedroom and saw a message written in thick red liquid dripping down the wall above her bed. "Come find me," it read. She and her sister were home alone. This is the terrifying story of something living inside the walls of Annie Andrews' home. This case horrified me, and let's dive into it in story form. Annie Andrews was a 16-year-old girl living in Pepperell, Massachusetts, a small town of 12,000 people. She was a bright young girl with beautiful long hair. She had a little sister named Jessica and an overworked but loving father named Brian Andrews. Annie's mother recently passed away, losing her battle with cancer, and she wasn't the same since. Her bubbly personality faded. She wanted to be comforted. She wanted to feel happy again. They lived in a quiet wooded area in a 3-bedroom house with a basement. Her father, Brian, wasn't home much. After losing his wife, he was doing everything he could to support the family, which meant working long nights and being away from his daughters. One Monday afternoon in the fall of 1986, Annie had just come home from school and she was sitting on the couch watching TV, bored, and Jessica was in her bedroom. Annie was taken out of her boredom when she heard the house phone ring. She walked over to the kitchen and picked it up. "Hello?" Annie heard someone breathing heavily, but no answer. "Hello?" She was about to hang up when she heard an unfamiliar voice reply. A boy who went to a different school. He was friends with some of her friends, and he told her that one of them had given him her number. "My name's Danny," he said. She could sense he was nervous. Annie wondered which friend had given her number out, but she continued to talk to him. He seemed nice enough and eager to talk to her, she thought. Danny told her that he was tall, blonde, loved to play any sports he could. Anytime she spoke, she felt as if he was hanging on to her every word. She liked that feeling. Over the next few days, they talked a few more times, and finally, Danny asked her out on a date. Annie, finding comfort in the phone calls, said yes. The day had arrived the following weekend, and Annie was finishing up getting ready when she heard the doorbell ring. She ran down the stairs and yelled out that she'd get the door to her father. He and her sister were in the living room. Nervous but excited, she opened the front door, but her smile faded. Annie saw a dark-haired teenager about her age staring back at her. He had greasy, unkempt hair, and she could see the stains on his sweatshirt from days prior. Annie was confused and a little bit uncomfortable, but she still decided to go get ice cream with him. As they sat down at the ice cream shop, they exchanged awkward glances, but things became even more uncomfortable. Danny kept asking her about her mother, what happened to her, how death made her feel, how hurt she was, what she felt. It was as if he was infatuated with death. Annie felt extremely uncomfortable. She started looking around the shop and tapping her fingers on the table. She wanted to leave. She answered the questions as best she could, but she was starting to get scared. "My dad wants me to get back home soon. I should go now," she said with a hint of panic in her voice. Nor she or Danny had finished their ice creams yet. He offered to walk with her, but she reassured him that she could walk home by herself. After a quick goodbye, she rushed out the door with no intention of ever seeing him again. He creeped her out. A week later, Annie had forgotten all about the nightmarish date and Danny altogether. The feeling of loneliness and missing her mother kept growing stronger. She and Jessica missed her terribly. The way she'd smile at them, or the way she'd wrap her arms tightly around them when she saw them after school, the way she listened. Both Annie and Jessica were lying on the living room floor reading books one day after school. "Hey, I know how we can talk to Mom," Jessica blurted out. "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying we should contact Mom through a seance. A friend from school told me about it today." Annie looked at her sister with a grin. They rushed down the basement stairs holding a candle, pillows, and a blanket. They spread out the blanket on the carpet floor, sat on the pillows, and lit the candle. The dim light from a lamp in the corner barely illuminated the room. Sitting across from one another, they joined hands. They started chanting and repeating the words, "We want to talk to our mom." But nothing. The two opened their eyes and started to giggle. They didn't think it would work. Blowing out the candles, the two rushed back upstairs to get ready for bed. But in the middle of the night, Annie woke up to a scratching sound coming from behind the wall next to her ear. She opened her eyes, still half asleep, and looked around. But no one was in the room. She reached for the lamp next to her bed and turned on the light. Then she pushed herself out of bed and searched the floor. That's when she heard slow-moving footsteps approaching her bedroom. She went back to her bed unsettled and pulled the blankets over herself. Both her father and sister were asleep. She could see the doorknob slowly turning and the door creaked open. There stood Jessica, but she had an odd look on her face. Relieved, Annie sat up. You really freaked me out. What are you doing in my bedroom anyway? Don't you hear that?" The sisters were silent, and then they heard 3 distinct knocks coming from behind the wall. Do you think the seance actually worked?" Jessica asked. Annie brushed it off, and they convinced each other that they were just tired, and they went back to sleep in their beds. But the next day after school, they heard the same knocks coming from Annie's bedroom. This time, they knew they weren't imagining it. They heard the knocks throughout all hours of the day and night. When they were home alone, they were louder. Both Annie and Jessica began to fear that the seance had brought something evil inside their home. When Brian, their father, came home from work late one evening, Annie approached him. "Dad, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to, but I think the seance brought something inside this home." She was on the verge of tears. Brian was aware of the seance, and he told his daughter that it was impossible, that maybe the noises were just the house settling. "I'm serious, Dad, I keep hearing them coming from behind the wall." But Brian didn't believe her. Instead, he told Annie that he understood that she and her sister were grieving their mother's death, that maybe this was just stress. With a sigh, he spoke. "Look, I know you're hurting, and I'm sorry I haven't been around lately. This has been tough on me too. I should have been there more for you and your sister, and I'll do better." He gave Annie a hug, which only alleviated some of her fear. The next few days were uneventful until one day. The girls came home from school exhausted, and Annie, wanting to lie down for a bit, went into her bedroom. When she walked in, she felt uneasy. Something didn't feel right. Annie was sure of her nightstand being right next to her bed, but now it was sitting across the room in the corner. When she turned to face the dresser, the hairbrush she always left on top of it was missing. Her stomach felt like it was in knots. As each day passed, something from Annie's bedroom either went missing or was misplaced. One day, Jessica was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich when she left it on the counter to go grab something from her room and came back to finish it. It was gone. Then one night, the knocks came back. Both Annie and Jessica became more and more terrified of whatever was inside the home. When they went to their father, he kept telling them it was just their imagination. One late afternoon in January 1987, the girls were sitting on the couch watching a movie when they heard a noise coming from the basement. It sounded like someone was scratching the wall, and then they heard the knocks. Both Annie and Jessica could feel the fear growing in their chest. Annie walked over to the kitchen counter, grabbed a knife from the butcher block, and told Jessica to stay close behind her. Together, they slowly crept down the basement stairs, and when they turned the corner to face the room, on the cement wall, written in thick red liquid, were the words, "I'm in your room. Come find me." Horrified, Annie and Jessica rushed back upstairs to the front door. They ran as fast as they could to their neighbor's house, banged on the door in tears. The neighbor, a middle-aged woman, invited the girls in, concerned. When Annie calmed down a little bit to tell her neighbor what happened, she asked if she could use her phone to call her father. Brian was at the office when his phone rang. When he picked up, he could hear his daughter gasping for air in between cries. She asked if he could come home quickly. She was hysterical. Immediately concerned for his daughters and thinking that the trauma of losing their mother finally was taking a toll on them, he rushed back. He picked his daughters up from the neighbor's house and brought them home after some convincing. Then he went down to the basement to investigate what his daughters had seen and what made them so terrified. In shock, he approached the sinister message on the wall to take a closer look. With his finger, he wiped the red liquid off the wall and examined it. "It's ketchup," he said flatly. He turned to look at his daughters, and Annie could see that he was concerned and suspicious. Not because of the message, but for their mental state. He didn't believe them. Several weeks went by without anything strange happening after that. No knocks, nothing went missing. Until one cold afternoon in January 1987, Annie came home from school with her sister, and when she eventually went into her bedroom, she stopped in her tracks. On the wall above her bed, written in the same strange red liquid, were the words, "I'm back. Come find me if you can." Without any hesitation, Annie ran down the hallway towards the living room where Jessica was doing her homework. She grabbed her hand, pulled her towards the front door, running. They ran to their neighbors again. Annie was so scared that whatever was writing these messages was still inside the house. She called her father to tell him what happened again, but this time finding the courage to tell him that this wasn't in their imagination. She mentioned the single eerie message written on her wall above her bed and the knocks that were coming from behind it. Brian again rushed back, sensing that his daughter was telling the truth, but this time he entered the house alone. He went straight to Annie's bedroom and saw the words on the wall, recognizing the ketchup. But when he turned to face the opposite wall, he saw another message. "Marry me," it said. It was still wet and dripping down the wall. Annie never mentioned another message to him, and then the realization hit. This was done while his daughters were out of the house. Everything clicked. The messages, the noises, things disappearing. As he was about to rush out of the house to call 911, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. He slowly crept down the hallway towards the front entrance of the house. When he turned the corner, standing in the middle of the living room was a dark-haired boy who was wearing a dress that belonged to Brian's late wife. It was Danny. Brian was filled with fear first, but then it turned into anger. Danny also wore an old, blonde, matted wig, and he had his face covered in face paint, resembling makeup. How dare he, Brian thought. When Brian's eyes fell towards Danny's left hand, he saw Danny holding a hatchet that he usually kept in the garage. Brian froze. He knew this boy was unpredictable, but within the blink of an eye, Danny lunged towards him, wielding the hatchet, fully intending to strike Brian with it. But Brian fought back. With some struggle, he was able to grab the hatchet out of Danny's hand and throw it across the room. It hit the wall and landed on the floor with a bang. Brian was stronger, and Danny realized this. He pushed Brian to the floor as hard as he could and ran out of the living room. Brian chased after him down the hallway, searched every room, but he couldn't find him. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. Breathing heavily from the panic inside of him, Brian ran to the phone and called the police. When they arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the house, but they couldn't find Danny anywhere. They went into Annie's bedroom, and what Brian learned from the police shook him to his core. The police found a gap between the wall and a built-in cabinet in Annie's room. With some struggle, they pulled the cabinet away, revealing a tiny crawl space. Their eyes met someone looking back at them with a dead stare. Danny. Judging by the wrappers and garbage in the crawl space, he had been living inside the house for 2 months. When they entered the crawl space, the police found passageways leading to different areas around the house, and it got worse. They found peepholes throughout the house, allowing Danny to watch the family wherever they went. Police arrested Danny, and he was charged. He spent several months at a juvenile facility and was released in October 1987. Danny had suffered a traumatic childhood. He was abused physically, psychologically, and in other horrible ways by his own father. He didn't have any friends at school, and when he went to a psychiatrist for treatment, the psychiatrist had abused him too. He first started with petty theft, breaking and entering, and then stalking the Andrews family. Just 2 months after his release, he committed a crime so heinous that the judge sentenced him to serve 3 life sentences consecutively. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any more stories. And I'll see you in the next one.